I hear all right.
Yeah, who cares at my age? Oh my goodness, there is sun coming in the window at the Battle of Plattsburgh Museum on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base on almost the waning moments of 2008. It's the 30th of December at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we had a blizzard this morning. I called my friend Nap Light last night and said, can you come and talk to us? He said, sure. He called me this morning. He said, I don't know what it looks like out of your window, but boy, is it blowing here in Peru. Wasn't that awful?
It was terrible.
You know, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, it was absolutely whiteout conditions. And we thought, well, my wife said, Calvin will never make it from Champlain. I said, oh, yes, he will. He'll find a way. Well, I told you the sun was coming out.
And it did.
And it came out. It's still kind of windy and blustery. And first of all, I want to thank Keith Hercolo. I called Keith the night before, last night, and said, can we use the museum? And he said, sure. We got here, and Christina was shivering outside of her car in front of the interpretive center, and she came over and unlocked the door and turned the heat up. And here we are, and with a very good reason, Mr. Nap Light. First of all, to introduce Nap to our friends who may not have seen him before. Where you been, under a rock? Nap's been here for 150 years. Well, at least since 1922, right, Napper?
Yes, that's right.
Graduated from MAI,
1940.
1939. The subject of our program took place, so you were about a 17-year-old kid.
I was entering my senior year.
Already playing a musical instrument, playing the drums, right?
Yes, I was in the band there at MAI. Peter Blessett, a 26th Infantry musician, was the band director at MAI at that time.
I knew there was a connection. 26th Infantry was stationed right here.
Yes, he had
on these hallowed grounds.
He was a fine trumpet player. And he had some good bands at MAI when he was there.
And you played music around here for a long time. We've interviewed Knapp so many times. He attended Champlain College.
I did. Yes.
Right on these. Does it feel weird when you drive out here, come on these grounds, remembering what college was like in the 40s?
Oh, yes. I could visualize from here some of the classrooms just outside here. I used to spend some time. Yes.
Well, we're in the Battle of Plattsburgh Museum, which was formerly stables, as I understand. I don't know what it might have been when you went to school here. Oh. This building, do you remember?
Yes, but there weren't any horses here.
At that time?
At that time, no.
Well, I want to tell you something. In 1939, there were horses here. In 1939, there were Army maneuvers.
Oh, yes.
Over 50,000 troops came to town here and conducted 2 weeks of maneuvers in August of 1939 when I was 2 and you were 17. And up and down the Saranac River, based right here on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base. And what a time it was. Every aspect of North Country life was affected by those 2 weeks of maneuvers. And wow. There were memories for everybody, but you know what, Nap? It's hard to find people who were around at that time who still have their wits about them. Well, you're one of the sharpest people I ever knew. Keith Herculo's come in. Hello, Keither. Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah.
So 1939 was a very good year for these Army war games, or maneuvers, as they called. And the reason we got started on this whole thing is because Calvin found this book, right? Yep. On eBay, bid on it, and wait till I tell Keith about the book that you missed on. It was wonderful. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. These war games only lasted 2 weeks, but had a lasting effect on the North Country because they were bivouacked and stationed all over the place, and anybody who lived in Plattsburgh all the way up Route 3, all the way up to Redford and beyond, at least remembers the troops going by.
Absolutely.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of troops, over 500 horses, and cannon and tanks, and even airplanes flying out of the airport in Malone. And it was quite a time. We're going to look through the book. You got a copy of it, but first of all, when I called Keith Ercolo, who is the president of this here organization, last night, and a dear friend of ours for a long time, and said, Keith, can we use the museum? Huh?
And Knapp's nephew.
And Knapp's nephew, of course.
Yes.
I don't know how much alike they look.
His mother is my sister Yvonne.
Isn't that amazing? Everything is connected. Matter of fact, we're going to spend a little time together on New Year's Eve with any.
Looking forward to it.
And Knapp's going to show up with just a diaper on and 2009 written somewhere. I don't know
I'm not so
who's
sure
going to.
about that.
Oh, okay. But anyway, Keith said, I said, I can't find anybody who remembers. He said, Knapp might remember. So I called, I said, Knapp, remember the maneuver? Oh, yeah! He said, I lived right across the road. Now, before we even begin, I want you to tell your story about what your memories are as a 17-year-old kid
Of the maneuver.
of the maneuvers. Because you were going to MAI and you lived down,
On Beekman Street.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and not very far from Miron's Tavern, actually. And the area
good
just...
enough landmark for me, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I spent some time there as a youngster. Well, anyway, across from where we live, the old Light Homestead, 134 Beekman Street,
Yep.
there was just one house, and his name was Harry Thomas, and he was an insurance man in Plattsburgh, and he owned 3 fields behind his house, which was just west of Beekman Street. And gee, one morning in the summer, here this equipment came through and turned right in front of our house and went up the field and started pitching tents along a wooded area on the rise between Beekman Street and Prospect Avenue in the back. There were woods there, and they were near the woods trying to sort of camouflage themselves.
Now, it's hard to picture in my mind what that might have looked back then, because now we got the Methodist Church over there, which moved to that area after the tremendous fire, because it was down on Oak Street when it burned, and that whole area has changed with housing
Absolutely,
developments.
Yes, yeah.
But anyway, there was a big field there.
Yes, and I remember them pitching tents, and I happened to walk up there one day, and it was mess time at noon, and there were a couple of my friends who had been hired to help serve the troops.
Come on.
Yeah, and it was, I would say, about a company of infantrymen, maybe 250, 300. It was just one company, but they were moving along. Apparently, other companies in the infantry, and it was part of the 26th Infantry that was right here. And so they were on their move during the maneuvers. Or maneuvers is moving,
Sure.
And it was quite impressionable to me as a youngster to see this, and especially to see some of my contemporaries helping out, working. They were hired, and they did various tasks to help the kitchen mess people.
Yeah. Did you go up there every day to see what was
No,
going
they
on?
were only there about 2 days. They were on the move, maneuvers.
But
moving.
the way you just told the story, Knapp, you give me the impression that you didn't even know they were coming until you saw them go by.
Well, I didn't know they were going to stop there.
Yeah.
I had seen other units go by because it was old Route 22 on Beekman Street,
Sure.
going Housley's Corners and then up to Beekman
Oh, yeah.
Town.
Oh,
And it was
yes. Oh,
one of the
yes.
secondary routes going through Plattsburgh.
Oh,
Route
yeah.
9, that was before the Northway, and then 22 went on just a little west of Route 9, and that was a secondary road, but it was a good road. And do you know, I remember Prospect Avenue was then a dirt road.
Oh,
And
come
yeah,
on.
it hadn't been paved yet.
You gotta be
There were
kidding
very
me.
few houses on it. And of course, now there are ever so many houses between Beekman Street and Prospect Avenue going in from especially the Tom Miller Road.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
You've given us a time machine here. We got a time machine right next to me. Just crank him up in the back, and he's going right back to 1939.
Well, it was impressionable. I was a youngster and in school, and this was quite an occasion.
Now, you yourself were in the service, of course, after that, But what must have been interesting to see these people all moving in, you say about 200. Do you think they had tanks there, or just?
No, this unit didn't
The
have
26
tanks.
didn't have tanks
No.
anyway, right?
But ever so many had gone by, moving along Route 22, going north and west. It was quite a lot of activity.
They were eventually strung out for many, many miles.
Oh, yes.
And a great deal of the activity that we're going to talk about from this book today and show a lot of the pictures happened at the so-called Federal Reserve and Macomb Reservation,
Absolutely.
which now to
West
modern
Group.
people is known as Macomb Park,
Yeah.
with a good camping area. But boy, there were, even when I moved here in the 60s, there were still remnants from those maneuvers up there, and you could dig around and find spent shells and all kinds of stuff up in the fields across from what would be now Macomb Park.
Yes.
So it did affect life in general for a couple of weeks in a big way. And we're going to talk how much food they ate
Oh, my
and how all the farmers were involved and little kids were involved delivering apples and all kinds of fun. We're going to have some fun today.
All right.
All right, let's pause for a minute. Oh, we took a little break, and we had time for the heat to come on, and Keith stopped by and said hello. I looked inside, and Calvin had a note, Alfred Santway, age 121. Now, that's enough to pique your curiosity.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, here's what happens. This book, which none of us, at least I had no idea this book existed, neither did Calvin, until he saw it on the internet and bid on it and bought it, was published and copyrighted by Santway Photocraft Company, Watertown, New York. So Calvin is a curious sort, and so am I, and he went on the white pages and found a listing in Watertown, if you can believe it, for Alfred Santway. But why it would say 121, because you know the man is not alive. Maybe that was just for your benefit. But I'll bet you any money that he had something to do with this Santway Photocraft Company in Watertown, New York, which published this book. And maybe, just maybe, we can do a little investigation, because I know a lot of people who live in Watertown, and see what they remember about the Santways. In any case, inside this book it says Souvenir of the First Army Maneuvers. It's significant in many ways. First of all, this North Country had never seen anything like that. And secondly, because it was the largest peacetime event in U.S. military history. In Plattsburgh, New York, August 1939. And on the front page it says actual photographs made at the battlefront, giving a complete pictorial story of this peacetime war, showing every military operation as conducted in actual warfare. Now, many of our young listeners may not have been around in 1939 as the Napper was, and don't realize what a volatile time in the world history that was, 1939. Wasn't it, Nap?
Yes, it's pre-war, and it's coincidental that this happened at that time. It got our troops ready for what was happening shortly thereafter.
And don't you think that stuff didn't pay off?
I'm sure it did.
Because, there weren't just troops here. There was machinery, all kinds of armored vehicles and men and horses and so on. And we're going to show a lot of pictures inside the front page. And Calvin has been kind enough to copy this whole thing for Nap. He can take it home and look at it. But I looked through these photographs, and there are people whose names are very familiar. For example, Lieutenant General Hugh A. Drum.
Yes.
Does the name Camp Drum, Fort Drum, Pine Camp, does that ring any bells?
It does.
Well, there you go.
I remember that name.
A lot of people were here, and...
Can we see it?
Huh?
Can we see it?
Yeah, we're going to show it to you. We'll show it to the North Country. This is the first photograph in the book. Don't you love the uniforms? Mm-hmm. There were a lot of uniform parts left over from the First World War at that time. Look at the riding boots. Huh? Aren't they great?
Yes.
Aren't they great? Corps commanders, Major General Payne, Major Haskell, Woodruff,
Major
General Drum was born in the Army. There you go.
Yeah.
At Fort Brady, Michigan. Leader in modernizing and mechanizing the Army. His service includes Chief of Staff to General John Pershing. That's pretty good credentials, wouldn't you say?
Back
During the American operations in France and tours of duty with the General Staff, where his influence materially aided in bringing the Army up to date. And on the bottom, special services taking place at the Plattsburgh Barracks. You know where that was.
It's here.
On August 20th. Colonel U.S. Grant III. How's that for another name? We'll drop all these names here today. Chaplains, Lazarin, Paul Dwight Moody, and John White spoke on religion in a crisis. What is it about they all believe in God and when you're in the foxhole? Remember that old saying? That
belief.
No atheist in a foxhole, right?
That's right.
And then the other picture on the lower right-hand side, 22 foreign military and air attaches who witnessed the maneuvers. And it talks about the people who were here, and German military and air attache General Friedrich von Bedecker. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Our German friends would chide me on that one. But he was the highest ranking visiting officer who planned the railway movement to the Western Front in 1914.
How about that? He learned something.
So, anyway, inside that first page, the headline, Calvin reminded me, it says the Battle of Plattsburgh, New York. Interesting that we're standing in the Battle of Plattsburgh Museum, which actually signifies an event that happened a long time before 1939, but it says, for the second time within 5 years, the First Army gave to America its greatest peacetime military concentration. In 1935, when major portions of the force were assembled at Pine Camp, New York, there you go, to initiate a series of training periods for the four armies, it represented a greater body of soldiers than had been brought together without the threat of hostilities. In 1939, maneuvers in Plattsburgh, New York set a new record. So here we were. In 1935, Knapp, 36,500 men gathered from 8 states. And here in Plattsburgh in 1939, 52,000, representing 13 states, including a regular Army brigade from Kentucky. That must have been a thrill for them to be up here in August, huh? Mm-hmm. For 2 weeks of battle practice from August 13th through the 26th. No small feature of the training was the mobilization itself, accomplished largely by highway with motor caravan. The 7th Cavalry Brigade drove 1,000 miles, but also utilizing railroads and airways, a relatively new thing in the First World War and pretty well established by 1939. Calvin reminded me that I didn't show the 2 photographs at the bottom of the page mentioning the people that I had just talked about a few minutes ago. So we had a lot of famous people here during that time period, as well as the doughboys, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
There's a phrase that people aren't familiar with. Now, when you were a young guy, Knapp, was there something glamorous about the armed services?
Oh, not really. No, it was never glamorous to me. Of course, I had no idea that I was eventually
you were going to be in the fray, huh?
In the military.
Well, you didn't know it when you were 17 that we were even going to have a Second World War.
No, and I believe I wondered why they were doing this, because we weren't in any trouble at that time, although Hitler was beginning to make his moves in Europe, but I certainly didn't anticipate what was going to happen.
You had a lot of other things on your mind when you were 17 years old. Pearl Harbor was a long ways
That's
away.
right.
There were, as you said, rumblings. There were what we have called publicly the winds of war, right, that had developed a long time before we got involved in the Second World War and before Pearl Harbor. And when we're recording this near the end of December of 2008, I'm really excited because for the first time in my life, I will be visiting Pearl Harbor in a couple of weeks.
Nice.
And we'll be able to pay my own tribute to those lives that were lost there, because that was Oh, what a day. Talk about living in infamy, right?
You've been to Pearl Harbor?
Never
You've
been.
to
I've been to
Hawaii?
Hawaii, to the island of Kauai, but never over to Pearl Harbor, never to Waikiki. And so we'll get a chance to
That's a
look around
must.
there.
Yes.
Yeah, it is, because that was quite a time, and many of us, even, I was just a little guy when the war broke out, but I have vivid memories because of listening to Gabriel Heater and Walter Winchell and all the ships at sea
Absolutely.
on the radio, because my parents were very much involved, and my dad was one of the air raid wardens in our neighborhood, and so there were a lot of memories involved there, but we didn't have television.
No.
We had radio.
Yes.
We had newspapers. But as a 17-year-old, you weren't paying much attention to what was going on in Europe.
No, not really.
I don't know if you had current events classes at MAI.
Oh, yes. Yeah. We had civics classes,
So you had studied perhaps the First World War.
That's right. Yeah.
And Calvin reminded me after we turned the camera on that by the time this is aired on local television stations, this event will have occurred 70 years ago.
Quite a while ago.
We're lucky to have you here, Knapp.
I'm lucky to be here.
You're forever a teenager as far as I'm concerned. I want you to take a look at some of these pictures because Knapp reminded us that some of the roads were dirt roads.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And
In
even
the city.
in the city even.
Yes.
And Ruger Street was definitely dirt road back in those days
in the
until the
West End.
1940s. Route 3 was paved, Route 9 was paved,
Yes.
they were still narrow roads and would be country roads rural roads by today's standards, wouldn't they?
They would, yes.
So I don't know what damage might have been involved with driving all these troops and tanks and heavy equipment. Can you imagine?
I remember tanks did cut up the shoulders of the
Had to be.
blacktop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking at that top picture, Calvin, on that page. It says reconnaissance cars of the 7th Cavalry Brigade are seen on their 1,000-mile trek from Kentucky. Trucks were wide-spaced and formed into groups to permit normal traffic to pass in both directions. The vehicles shown here were in constant touch by radiophone. How about that? 1939, with the entire line. They made the longest march of the assembled forces. So you know that it had to be a spectacle when they went by some of these farm communities on the way up to Saranac.
I did see in one of these pages where the infantry troops marched 30 to 40 miles a day while they were here.
And some of our kids won't walk to
That's a
school.
long walk.
Our kids won't even walk to school these days. Oh my goodness. All right, let's look at the next picture. At the rate we're going, it'll take us 7.5 days to finish this book. A long line of convoy trucks approach their destination, bearing troops for the maneuvers. These Army vehicles, modern version of the famous Conestoga wagon, and they even look that way with the canvas on the back, that supplied Braddock's ill-starred column are transports, supply carriers, gun horses, communication posts, and sometimes messengers for the hard-fighting troops. During operations, they negotiate meadows, forests, and ford shallow streams. Of course they do. Very, very interesting. And I suppose that there are people maybe alive who had relatives. I wonder, did you have any relatives who might have been involved? Any older relatives?
Not that I recall. No.
Hard to know. I bet you there are people watching this who might have had relatives who were involved, because every time we mention the 26th Infantry, somebody will say, my grandfather, my father, my Uncle Charlie, 26th Infantry made a real impact on this area, didn't it?
Yes. I'd like to tell you a little story about, Ron Ewing.
Oh, yes, of course.
Well, his father was a drummer in the 26th Infantry Band.
Oh, no, really?
He impressed me when I watched the band perform at concerts and in parades. As a matter of fact, early in my drumming days, I broke a drum head, and they were calfskin then, and I had to go to the infantry band, and Sergeant Ewing repaired, he put a new drum head on the hoop for my field drum.
Come on.
Yes. Yeah, that was
What a great story.
Ron Ewing's father, who was a serviceman here as a bandsman.
And we might mention that the so-called Four Chimneys building, which is now the Clinton County Historical Museum, right across the corner from where we're sitting now, was the band building, I think, for the 26th Infantry. Am I right?
I believe so.
I think I think they told us that. So maybe
yes.
that's where you went to get your drum fixed. I wonder.
No, I recall it was right next to the hospital, which is along the right side of the circle, down
right.
here a little bit.
Down that way. Isn't
Yeah.
that interesting? Anyway, did I show the bottom picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that was the company has left its transports and is hiking toward the front. Led by its officers, such sights were daily happenings on Clinton County highways during the 2 weeks that operations were in progress. The first few days were devoted to hardening the men. Yeah, does that sound familiar?
Oh, yes.
From basic training? Hardening the men, drills and marches with full equipment being in order to get them fit for the strenuous fighting. I mean, they really fired the cannons. And I got to tell you that my friend Ron Sears, Ron and Millie Sears, good friends, both have memories of these maneuvers. Ron was a little kid, and it was one of his relatives' place. I'll say it's his grandfather, and I'll probably be wrong. But they negotiated to put a cannon right on their front lawn. And every time they fired the cannon, it would blow out one of the windows. So he says he thinks they replaced every window before they got through with those maneuvers. And Millie talks about her parents out there on Route 22B toward Peru getting involved. And I remember Kay's father, and I wish the late Alfred Vaughn were here because he talked about delivering people. You know, the housewives would make sandwiches, and the kids would deliver them out to the troops, and there would be, how they got fresh water. Later on in this book, it tells us how much food they had, how much meat they consumed. 52,000 men?
Wow,
Imagine what that was like. Absolutely. All right. There is a lovely picture of our American flag. You know, people say the flag is the flag is the flag. Well, how many flags have made an impact on your life and mine? How many times have we saluted that flag?
Absolutely.
How many times have we looked at that Iwo Jima, raising the flag on Iwo Jima?
Many.
One of the most famous photographs ever taken. It says here, still there, above the 5 divisions assembled for the First Army maneuvers, in camp and post, Old Glory floated, emblem of the land in defense of which the training was held, with all its traditions of glorious deeds and surmounted hardships on the field of battle. Throughout the operations, officers and men had constantly in mind Francis Scott Key's words, "Long may it wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." Wow. Set off by fleecy clouds, it flies beneath stretches of sky as blue as its field. Somebody very bright wrote these captions, didn't they? Set off by fleecy clouds. Wow. An inspiration to the forces in the strenuous days of their battle over the rocky hills and across the swiftly rolling streams of Clinton County. Boy, oh boy. Well, you can imagine looking at this bottom picture that they had to have traffic cops. If you're going to have that many things on the roads, Army cops, the liaison between the Army and the citizen, stationed at every important crossroad. They directed both military and civil traffic during the maneuvers. Courteous and considerate, they gave the public a high opinion of Army personnel. So those are the MPs down there in the corner.
Military police.
Oh,
yes.
the military police. All right, now look at the other little corner. There's so many great. How many photographs did we say, Calvin? 70 some? Yeah, a bunch of photographs in this book. So it's, when Calvin and I talk about old books, we think of them as treasures because this is what a wonderful collection. It says there, the engineers have assembled a varied assortment of the material with which they're concerned. Note the stack of tools, including the wheelbarrow, at the extreme right. Beyond this pile are a number of attack boats employed in the river operations. That had to be something. Even baled straw is included, handy on muddy roads. When you're dragging cannon with a team of horses, right? Can you imagine? I mean, we've seen the photographs taken by Brady during the Civil War of those huge cannon being stuck in the muddy roads of the South, and oh my.
Good example is a couple of canyons right outside the entry here. I'm wondering how the horses were able to pull those.
You wonder how they could do it, and they had
so
to.
large.
Yep. Well, some of the small cannon were towed by hand.
Oh,
We're recording this at the Battle of Plattsburgh Museum. Thanks to Christina and Keith for allowing us to use their facility here. We are so fortunate to have this museum complex. 3 museums, the Battle of Plattsburgh Association Museum and Interpretive Center across the road, and their wonderful shop. And Christina said they did very well before Christmas this year.
very good.
The Transportation Museum, which is not a fur piece away, and the Clinton County Historical Museum and that Four Chimneys building that I mentioned before. We're so lucky. This was only a dream to have this kind of museum campus. You and I have seen the Clinton County Museum move a few times over the years.
Absolutely.
Remember when it was upstairs in City Hall
Yes. Yeah.
for a long time?
Absolutely.
A lot of things up in that space up in City Hall, right?
Oh, that
over
room,
the years.
That room has been redone so well.
And we mentioned Keith Erkelo, and Keith is the one that almost single-handedly did that whole project and turning it using volunteer work
Yes, he had
and
his.
any resources he could get his hands on to create that beautiful space up there for the auditorium. It's nice, isn't it?
Yes, it's lovely.
All right. Now, yes, they did have airplanes in 1939. Of course they did. They had, and they did have aerial photographs in 1939. They had all kinds of planes flying in and out here during these maneuvers. This is a pilot's eye view. Isn't that neat? Right here, a Plattsburgh barracks. First Army headquarters, seen from the air. Pleasantly situated on Lake Champlain. It's one of the older Army posts. I guess it was.
Yes.
Brought to national prominence by the establishment there of the first successful effort to train civilians as a reserve in the Citizens Military Training Camp, introduced by Major General Leonard Wood. And our viewers should be familiar with that if they watch this program regularly, because we've talked a great deal about the so-called Plattsburgh idea and how the ROTC program evolved from what happened there in the early part of the 20th century. Right here, huh?
Did you know where the Citizens Military Training Camp was?
Where?
It was right on Route 9, just south of the military burial grounds.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes, right there in well, it was now right next to the new
Lake Forest.
Lake Forest. That's right.
Yeah. Ah, okay. So that's where they were situated.
That's right.
There you go. All right. Now, I told you there were horses here, so look at the middle photograph. I spent several days poring over this book, and I found it delicious. The title is Horsemen, a scene reminiscent of the armies of yore. But for the barbed wire fence, the passage of these horsemen leading the column might be taken from photos of the Civil War, barring, of course, the differences in uniform. But the stiff-brimmed hats would become more slouchy after service. I imagine they would be. Did you ever work with horses when you were in the Army?
No, not at all.
Not at all by that time.
No, I was in the infantry, and at the 30th Infantry Division, Old Hickory.
Oh, yes.
Highly decorated in Europe, and we were given the French Croix de Guerre.
I remember you showing that. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, that was a surprise. It was awarded just a little over 2 years ago to to the 30th Infantry Division.
Isn't that
Further
60 some years later. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? What a wonderful story. You've got so many great stories. Now look at this bottom picture. Talk about the guns of war. It says their guns are modern.
Yes.
Here we are with the 112th Field Artillery of New Jersey, the only horse artillery in the maneuvers, and excepting for one regiment in Illinois, it's the last horse-drawn regiment in the country in those days. It says usually the outfit is handicapped by lack of steeds, drilling one battery at a time as a result. So at Plattsburgh, they mustered 410 horses.
I see that.
And 800 men. So there they are. Not only with the rubber-tired carriages, but the old wood-spoked wheels, too. Isn't that amazing? Wouldn't you love to be transported back in time to be there during this time period? Because I was only 2 years old, and I was living down near Westchester County at the time, but you were here. Did you ever get in a car and head west to watch any of the other maneuvers, or?
No.
Isn't that
unfortunately,
amazing?
I should have, but I didn't.
Didn't at the time. All right, that says a walking radio. Now, mind you, we're talking about 1939. Mm-hmm. Company, battalion, and regimental commanders utilized the ambulance radio phone known as transceivers. Isn't that amazing? And in 1957, I sent away for a Heathkit. Remember the name Heathkit, where you could buy kits to build radios. And I never even heard the word transceiver before. And what we ended up building was really what you would now call a CB radio. Little did I know until I read this book that they had transceivers, state of the art, in 1939. Yeah. It says, with them, communication was maintained with flanking troops and headquarters. They operate on an ultra-short wavelength. In the center is a collapsible map carrier, enabling officers to spread out maps while on the move. And you're going to see in the next picture a little more about the portable communication. It's truly amazing what they had. This two-way radio telephone is of an older type, but readily portable. It cannot, however, be operated on the move unless it's mounted on a vehicle. The diamond-shaped projection at the left is the aerial. They got that in quotes as if people wouldn't know what they were talking about.
An aerial, yeah.
In the background is an orderly is copying messages on a typewriter. One advantage is the ability to conceal the equipment. Did you work with communications people?
Not at all.
Not at all, no. So you weren't familiar with that, but boy, they were always there. Yeah. And they were laying telephone lines, even in the Second World War, as they did here, and we'll show you pictures later of miles and miles and miles of telephone lines that they were laying. All right, and now we're going to see about that on this bottom picture. Got it? All right. A civilian telephone lineman would be aghast at this method, but in the Army, telephone wires often are laid on the ground. Here, a horse-drawn wire carrier is unreeling its role to establish communication between the regimental command post and the very front line. Over it, artillery spotters make their reports. Isn't you gotta love it, Matt?
Yeah, I do.
And you were 17 at the time. All right. Turn the page, he said. And concealed from air observers beneath the trees, this artillery command post is equipped for instant communications with its batteries and with higher headquarters to avoid delay in laying down its fire. Progress of the battle is being followed upon the map. See the map there? From which the positions of the enemy are determined. Bear in mind, somebody had to determine who was winning these war games. So you had observers going from place to place to place. Mm-hmm. These guys are firing blanks and doing all the stuff that they would, just like some of the emergency preparedness exercises that we have now in the North Country. They were they were serious. And like you and I said in the beginning, this training, I'll bet you, did pay off for many of these troops, 50-some thousand troops.
Oh, sure.
Had to be, right?
I'm sure a lot of these low-class infantrymen became high class, high grade professionals in WW2 because it wasn't that much later.
Just a few years
Yeah,
after
just a
that.
few years later. Yes.
Yeah. Well, there was great foresight to have this training camp then, wasn't there? All right, that middle picture. And there were not chairs to go around, so the man at the right is seated on a wire reel. Look at him seated right there on a wire reel. Mm-hmm. Central controls many lines radiating from an adjacent command post to smaller units. Here, connections are made with the proper commander. Despite the stringing of wires over the roads, through fields, upon fences, little trouble results. I guess there weren't people around with wire cutters saying, "Not over my fence, you don't." Isn't that's amazing. And this next truck kind of fascinated me because I didn't remember seeing any. The closest thing I could remember that looked like that was one of the early milk trucks that delivered milk after they got rid of the horse and wagon delivering milk down there near New York City. But this is the Signal Corps operating the Army's only portable loudspeaker and sound recorder at the Plattsburgh maneuvers. The cross flags on the front door are the insignia of the Corps, which dates from Civil War time. Interesting. It's used for amplifying the religious service held on Sunday at the Plattsburgh barracks. There you go, boy, you couldn't escape. Mm-hmm. You know, during the Second World War, as you know, Hitler became an expert at indoctrinating, I'll use that word, indoctrinating people of all ages, including small children in Germany, by having speakers on posts all over the country in the cities. And people could not escape. And they thought, you know, he was the Fuhrer, and he was constantly trying to inspire people, right? You've heard his impassioned speeches, haven't you? Many, many times, although we didn't understand them. But when they invented the recording devices, wire recorders, then tape recorders, people believed that Hitler was speaking to them live all the time. He had pre-recorded these messages, which would be played to people. Today we'd be calling that brainwashing, wouldn't we?
I guess.
But he was a master at it, right? And he moved his people and created a lot of havoc for people like you, right?
Absolutely.
As a young man, but we're glad you made it back, Napper. We really are. All right, look at this. This bottom one reminds me of an old photograph I saw of a radio car that belonged to the old radio station WMFF, the forerunner for WEAV in Plattsburgh. And they had a transmitter down on Boynton Avenue back in the
Sure, at the bottom of the hill.
in early days, probably right around this time period. And there you have it. It said radio trucks were few when the First Army took the field in 1935, but they were no novelty in Plattsburgh. The white flag on its front indicates that it's used by umpires, there you go, to contact troop commanders in conducting the operations. Radio is becoming the main communication method in the Army.
How about that?
Ta-da!
Yeah.
Wouldn't these guys turn over in their graves if they knew the ways we have of communicating these days? All right. Now, something crosses my mind as I look at these pictures. I wonder if anybody did take film of these maneuvers. Wouldn't that be something to see in somebody's dresser drawer somewhere, one of those? Because they had movie cameras, the wind-up movie cameras.
I'm sure there were pictures taken.
Oh, yeah. It says, identified by the white bands, these men replaced the bullets and shells of actual warfare. Judging firepower, strategic situations, and all other pertinent facts involving the forces engaged, the umpires assess the casualties, direct retreat, and advance and control the entire situation during all operations.
Fantastic.
I wonder if anybody ever hollered, "Kill the umpire."
This is one of the few pictures that has a house in it.
This is one of the few pictures that has a house. Calvin, the first thing I did when I looked through the book is look for landmarks. There's a house, and if anybody viewing this program recognizes that house, we'd love to know where it is, because it's almost impossible. You know, you can see a few barns in the background, a few stone fences, but that's the only place where somebody might say, yeah, that's my grandfather's house. They were right in front of there when they stood there. Look at the milk cans. Look at the milk cans.
4 of them.
Oh, isn't that a riot? That, you know, I'd forgotten that house was even in there, Calvin. That's great. All right, next one. You see a lot of stone fences. Of course, they were setting up behind the stone fences. Says destruction of property was taboo.
Well,
So the men are lifting a 37 millimeter gun over the wall, which an officer is utilizing as an observation position. Machine guns followed as the company got into position. In the background, umpires watch the proceeding, making mental note of any errors that may be committed. And as you said before, these guys were pretty good. I had people tell me about the farms, you know, with ruts and things in the farms and fields, and they came back and fixed everything, and there weren't too many hard feelings, because we then, and hopefully some of us still do, have great respect for our military. And I think most of the people here, if not every single soul, knew what this was all about and knew that it was absolutely essential that we have the best trained army in the world, you know?
that's true.
Yeah. All right, so you see the stone in the background. Now, we've all seen surveyors by the side of the highway setting up. Calvin and I have done some nice shows with surveyors. And here they are, 2 range-finding instruments at the left and right being used to determine the correct distance to the target, the result being plotted upon the map. This is battery command post from which the fire of the 4 field guns is directed. There is no attempt here at concealment from the skies. Don't you love it? Nowadays we have a thing called GPS, where we can
Global
determine
positioning service,
global
yeah.
positioning, determine exact location. You can be walking in the woods and never get lost again, right? Some of those GPS devices are wonderful. All right, we turn the page. Got a great shot of a gun. It's amazing how they did camouflaging. This is the famous French 75.
Artillery piece.
Oh, yes. About 3-inch caliber, which American artillery is equipped, well concealed at the edge of a woods, firing directed by telephone from headquarters. The weapon ranges up to 4.5 miles. Think about that. And is capable of firing 3 rounds a minute and 6 rounds for short bursts. 4 of these guns comprise a battery. The huge balloon tires make moving them easy. While being 2 miles from the front line, they're not subject to rifle or machine gun bullets. That's a good shot right there in that wooded area, isn't it?
That's
All right. We're going to see a few more guns on the bottom here. And it says, a battery section is seen in action, its crew crouching behind the shield of the gun, boxes of shells in the foreground. I had one of those shell boxes.
really.
That's this one right here. I had one of those shell boxes at home until fairly recently. I should have saved it, I guess. It was old. Boxes of shells beyond over the back of the man beside a trail. A second and third cannon will be observed. The almost level position of the barrel indicates that the enemy can't be very far away. Yeah, you would lower your barrel at him. Then the other one in the corner. Calvin's doing very well at getting these pictures on. This is a situation when the Navy goes into battle, but this 155 millimeter, that's a 6.1 inch, that's good size, howitzer is more literally clothed for action, being draped with foliage to conceal it from the aviators.
Yes.
The howitzer fires a projectile of 100 pounds, approximately 7 miles.
My goodness.
That'd make a hole in your barn, wouldn't it?
Sure would.
Oh, baby. At right stands one of the heavy trucks that draws it. I can imagine.
Need one.
You know, we talk about it, and we talk about it often, the firepower that we had. Even in the Civil War, they had tremendous firepower with a cannon, didn't they?
I'm sure.
And boy, when you were in the Army,
It was considered then to be
oh boy.
superior, but
How about that big Bertha, the German
Oh,
gun, the
my
big Bertha?
goodness.
Wasn't that a huge thing to see? All right, there are still, this says, there are still a few Army mules in service. There you go. A machine gun platoon is moving to the firing line with its guns carried on the little carts that usually have given place to motorized transport. On arriving at the front, the gun will be set up and thereafter moved by manpower as tactics necessitate. Boy, Army mules are legendary, aren't they?
they are but
They-
obsolete now.
But obsolete now, yep. All right, let's look at the middle one. That's a great shot. Calvin and I, with the hometown cable cameras, have stood fairly close to cannon being fired on several occasions, and it does affect your hearing. You hear this ringing in your ears for a very long time, especially if you don't expect it. This one says, looking like a miniature cannon, this 37 millimeter gun is being supplanted by more modern weapons that can be handled more rapidly. Its 1-pound shell would disable a tank or armored car by one direct hit, and while spreading destruction over about a 50-foot radius, is primarily an anti-tank weapon. Isn't that amazing? All right, and the bottom shot. See, you won't have to buy the book, folks. Thank goodness Calvin bought it. They all ought to send him a check. It says, it might set up a smoke screen, but in the instance pictured, a member of the Chemical Warfare Service had released this pot under direction of umpires to simulate the position where an artillery barrage was exploding. A red or blue flag identifying the force laying down the barrage communicated the danger to the enemy. And here we are approaching 2009, and we're still worried about chemical warfare as being among the most evil of those so-called weapons of mass destruction.
Absolutely.
And I remember an uncle of mine who was injured forever by ingesting mustard gas in the First World War. Did you have to go through gas training
Yes,
with the gas mask?
yes, and we'd go into a tent where they had the gas, and we'd have to remove our gas mask and get just a whiff of it, and then put it back out, get out of the tent, and blow it out of our gas mask. It was an experience to let us know what we might run into sometime.
Isn't that amazing?
Part of
And,
infantry training, yes.
Yep. Well, anyway, I flipped the page and we talk, oh boy, there's camouflaging. Look at this. Isn't that the greatest? Look at that vehicle. It looks like a tree fell on it. It says a modern trooper is concealing his iron horse beneath branches cut from adjacent bushes. When he's finished, the light tank will look like a harmless, if astonishingly mobile, mass of foliage. I love it. This guy is poetic. Such camouflage was practiced by both sides on vehicles, guns, and even occasionally on the men themselves.
Sure.
The machine has been ditched to take advantage of overhanging branches. While one member of the crew dresses the steel vehicle, the driver peeks out from the lowered armor of his cab. I can see him there. Note the machine gun protruding above the roof and the tool strapped above the running board. And look at the chains on the tires. Look at the chains on the tires up here.
Absolutely.
Isn't that amazing? And as we're recording this on the 30th day of December 2008, there is a stiff wind blowing outside. We might get snowed in here till spring,
I
Napper.
hope not.
I do too. All right, it says, a troop of horse. In fighting power, this armored combat car, the 7th Cavalry Brigade, with its turreted machine gun, its anti-aircraft weapon on the roof, has the fighting power of a troop of horse in Napoleon's day. Napoleon!
My namesake.
That's you!
Yes.
Its 6 wheels will carry it cross-country through brush and woodlands at a speed that would have astounded General Custer. I imagine it would. Look at that.
Much faster than horses.
Oh, my.
It looks a lot like a lot of the German vehicles.
It does, didn't it?
World War II.
Yeah, and you worked with half-tracks, right, when you were in the military?
Well, yes, a few, but
Well, you never worked, never worked with tanks, the tank division?
no,
Never.
no. Infantry didn't have any tanks. They were in the armored divisions.
Yeah.
That were assigned to a division to the infantry in their advances.
That's all interesting. All right. Now let's look at this big field here. That's some farmer's field. I sure hope that somebody recognized that house that we showed a while ago. This says after the battle. Tanks and supporting infantry have completed an attack, charging across the field from the right and skirting the woods in the background. The photograph shows them swinging about to return to their starting point, while the doughboys who charged with them are dispersing. Tank crews, released from their confinement, are enjoying fresh air through the open ports, the machine gunners having opened the tops of their turrets from which they're viewing the ground over which they advanced. That's a good shot of the open field with the troops in it, huh? That's wonderful. All right, let's go to the bottom here. This is the first time we've mentioned bayonets. And it says, bayonets fixed, helmeted, and gas masked, and supported by their tanks, these infantrymen emerge from a screen of chemically generated smoke to carry an enemy position. Bayonets were not fixed during actual maneuvers, showing this photo to represent a demonstration. Oh, couldn't put your bayonet on during the maneuvers, huh?
No.
All right. Here's another good picture in this lower corner. And this says, demonstrating its superiority over any terrain, this tank dashed down a steep hill, skittered through a swamp, splashed over a muddy stream, turned around almost in its tracks, and came back over the same route, climbing up a hill almost as rapidly as it had gone down. And the caption for the picture is splash. I love it. Okay. Boy, here's a stone fence.
Looking at that reminds me of the hedgerows that
Boy, doesn't it, though.
used in Normandy in France as a protection as we
Really?
advanced. Yes, the farmers cleared the stones and the bushes and made walls, and they grew shrubbery, and they were a great protection for us as we advanced, the infantry that is, advanced in Normandy to expand the beachhead upon the invasion in Normandy.
And that is true of so many battles and so many wars. How many stone fences and picket fences and split rail fences do you recall on the battlefields of Gettysburg and visiting Gettysburg and in other wars, hiding behind the stone walls?
Yeah.
Well, you're right. It says, like their forefathers along the road from Concord, these men have picked the stone wall as their firing line. Mm-hmm. Stone walls have figured prominently in American military history from Lexington to Gettysburg, there you are, where one marked the farthest advance of Pickett's charge. In the photo, the infantrymen are watching for enemy patrols, taking advantage of the brush that protrudes above the parapet of their rustic breastworks to observe any approach without being seen. Once the military locates them, the wall is likely to become the front of the battle line. Mm-hmm. And you see the hats that they wore very much like the First World War hats that these guys had, mm-hmm. right? The pinched hats. All right, down below. And that says the enemy is located and the men are going into action. Note the position of the men in the foreground operating an automatic rifle. The officer beyond him has his pistol ready, while at the far end of the line, a soldier scanning the shrubbery for any sign of an attack upon their left. That's the firing line. What was the rifle you
A carbine. That was the weapon I had.
okay.
Yeah.
And then we went through all the M series, the M16s and
M1s, yes.
M1s. All right, let's look over farther. Of course, we had automatic weapons back in those days. The automatic rifle, an important weapon in the infantry company, capable of rapid alteration from target to target, delivering a veritable smother of missiles. One of these rifles is shown in the foreground. The bipod support upon which the barrel rests gives steadiness and accuracy. There you go. But you trained on several weapons, right?
Oh, yes, yes. Familiarization.
Yeah.
But the
Machine guns?
Yes, and the shoulder rapid
Yeah.
fire, I've forgotten the name of it.
Yep.
But the M1 also, that was the basic weapon for the forward infantrymen.
Yep. And when you came back home after the war, you didn't become a hunter, though, did you?
Not at all, no.
You
No,
didn't care if you never shot a gun again, did you?
That's right.
Isn't that
I
amazing?
never had a gun.
There you go.
But one of my brothers, who was in the service, he went into hunting, and he always had a gun. And I remember we had a little interesting story. We had some rats near a chicken coop we had in the back of our house.
Come on.
And we borrowed a 22 from our neighbor, and we compare. I'd shoot, I'd miss, and he'd shoot, and he'd get the rat and kill it, and I'd try again, I'd miss it, and he was much more accurate than I was.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I've never forgotten that.
Oh, I love that. That's
I
funny.
wasn't a very good shot.
Oh, golly, me neither. All right, here we go. Every time I pause, I can hear the wind blow outside. It says contact imminent. Guardsmen are seen advancing cautiously in expectation that the enemy is just beyond the woods. The field of fire is too restricted here, so they're attempting to gain the woods before encountering their opponent. The flat nature of the terrain makes observation difficult, and they're feeling their way through the field with the hedgerow. Once again, I'm not sure that anybody would recognize that particular hedgerow, but you never know. And the middle one says, in position. And that says,
Yeah.
the line has been formed with its left resting in the covert. The picture shows how the khaki uniforms merge into the dry grass, making hats and faces the most conspicuous objects. They're expecting the enemy to appear from the copse. There's a word you don't hear much anymore. Toward the left, upon which one of the men is training his rifle.
And that looks like a hedgerow up right in the center of the picture there.
Yep, and it certainly does. So, I don't know. There might be people watching this who recognize some of these scenes, and if they do, please call Calvin and me, and we'll mention it down and do a follow-up sometime. Of course, they mentioned that they had to ford the river at various places, so there were river maneuvers and boats involved, and here we have a footbridge. There's a good phrase for you, on the double. We know what on the double means, don't we?
Get going, yes.
Infantry crosses the Capon footbridge while 3 engineers in an attack boat stand by. The attack boat of shallow draft carries several men for quick passage of a stream. The bridge was constructed under cover of a heavy smoke screen laid down over a length of 10 miles and slightly wider than the river. I wonder how the cattle reacted to all this stuff on the farms as these guys were going by. I wonder if they gave cottage cheese for milk in those days. Okay, on the next page
That's interesting.
is the interesting map. And Calvin and I pored over this map to see what the locations would be and the landmarks would be. And you actually pointed on this map to show me, well, where the bivouac was, right across from your house,
Yes,
up there on Beekman Street.
yeah.
And,
Right about
you know,
where.
you can look along the river, you can go all the way up to Redford, and you can, you know, it's fun to just have a map like this and pore over it and see where the headquarters First Army was,
That's-
where we are sitting
Yeah,
right now on the
that's-
map,
That's right in the city.
right in the city. And it shows Ausable Chasm, Port Kent, and it even says the ferry to Burlington, Vermont down below.
Yeah,
And-
this was the area where
Yep,
they
talks about,
held the maneuvers.
shows all the way down to Ausable, Blackbrook, where the 7th Cavalry Brigade was located.
Yeah.
And some of these places that you don't hear much about anymore, Hawkeye, for example.
Oh, yes.
Been there, done that. Goodrich Mill, the East Kilns. Isn't that great? Clayburgh, Redford. Of course, Peasleyville, right in the middle. My favorite place, Schuyler Falls. The 101st Cavalry at Schuyler Falls. And so many people were telling me, oh, West Plattsburgh, where the American Legion Post 1619 is located now.
Yes.
I was told that they did set up, there are a lot of things set up right on that property. That was an interesting part where all the roads come together, the Vaughan Road, and, the other roads that head up toward Rand Hill come together. So there was a lot of activity right up there in West Plattsburgh, near where that little dam is, and quite a few of the local people remember activity up in that area, and they've given me their anecdotal memories. But, you know, Pickett's Corners,
Saranac.
Saranac, Moffattsville, the 18th Brigade was up there. And Woods Mills, West Plattsburgh,
Katyville.
Katyville, Morrisonville.
Was 26th Infantry Division was up
And in
West
the dotted line surrounds the U.S. government reservation that says Schuyler Falls, we know as the Macomb Reservation now.
Yes.
And that's where a lot of the activity was focused. Yep.
Yeah, they have that outlined.
Yep. And it's funny because I never noticed that until right now, Calvin. It says Lepham's Mills. It misspelled Lapham's Mills.
Oh, really?
It's got an E. Lepham's
yeah.
Mills.
Instead of a.
The 27th Division was down there, and
Little
right near the Little Ausable River in
Yeah,
Peru and
near
so on.
Peru.
Lepham's Mills. All right. Shall we call the map maker?
Le Femme.
Yeah, La Femme. All right. The following National Guard units participated in Plattsburgh maneuvers. I won't read it all, but it says the dotted area represents the field of operations.
Yes.
Camps were indicated by numerals designating the commands, the 3 regular Army outfits to the left. The following National Guard units participated in the Plattsburgh maneuvers: the 43rd Division, New Englanders, the 26th Division, Massachusetts, located northwest from Plattsburgh near West Plattsburgh, the 44th Division, camp of the 44th of New Jersey, southwest from Plattsburgh on the Peru Road. 27th Division, it says not all the New York troops were present, but Brigadier General Nathaniel Eggleston, acting divisional commander, in absence of Major General Haskell commanding the 2nd Corps, had among his forces, besides the divisional special troops, the 107th, 105th, 14th, and 165th Infantry, 102nd Quartermaster Regiment, and on and on and on. The cavalry posted west from Corps headquarters in an advanced position. And regiments not in the maneuvers trained at peak skill. Oh, I didn't know that. I should have read that before. All right. I love this next photograph right here.
That's not local though.
I know, but I love the photograph. And the reason for that is it shows just the absolute perfect rows of tents.
Yeah.
It's a city of guardsmen pictured from the air, and that's a photo of a National Guard camp during the maneuvers at Pine Plains in 1935, showing a typical Army village. Each row represents a company separated from its neighbor by the company street, company officers in their oblong tents placed at the head of their command, seen at the upper left, partially concealed by the trees, main highway running diagonally through the foreground with an intersection at the foreground. But you could see lots and lots of tents.
Yes.
And matter of fact, you saw tents right across the street, right?
Yes, just like that.
Just
That was about a company, as I remember, a company of infantry.
Oh, yeah. Now we're going to see some musicians here, because I can see some tubas down in the lower corner.
Oh, yes.
There you go. Identified by their Gideons, the Guidons, is it? The Guidons and regimental flags. The troops have assembled for religious services, many of them wearing their slickers. Behind, the camp stretches across the picture. The rolling nature of the country was in contrast to the flat expanse shown in the Pine Camp photograph above. It's significant that we had showed that Pine Camp photograph because it's quite an installation. And whereas we lost our air base, where we're standing right now, Pine Camp is now Fort Drum,
Yes.
and has expanded exponentially over the last few years, and is very, very important to the Watertown and the economy for that area. Right? All right. There's an anti-aircraft gun down in the corner. And that is a 3-inch anti-aircraft gun of the Coast Artillery. At night it operates with the sound locators and searchlights, all electrically operated. And by day, visual observation detects and locates the target. The guns are semi-automatic, shells being timed to explode as they are fired. How about that, huh? Okay, now we got to resist an air attack, and that's what we're going to do on this next one. I love it, because they flew the planes in here from the, we didn't have any runways or airbase facilities here, so they flew the planes in from, I think that's called the Dufort Airport in Malone. And this says machine guns from the main reliance of the infantry against airplane attack while on the march. Machine gun here shown apparently 30 caliber class, mounted on a rubber-tired carriage, making it not only easily transported but quickly put into action. You can see the rubber tires. Observe the circular sight on the muzzle. You see the sight right up here on the muzzle with the crossed centerpieces for aiming. The box filled with the cartridge belt indicates the gunner is ready to give the attacking plane a regular barrage of bullets.
Yes.
I didn't see the plane. Okay, now we're going to look at another one down below here in the corner. These are great photographs. The determined expressions on the machine gun crew testify to their preparation. Actually, they're saying, man, I'm hungry. I can't wait to get out of here and get some lunch. Wearing their tin hats and partially concealed by the high grass, they have their gun ready. Cartridge belt threaded and the water hose attached because these were water cooled, right?
Yes.
Water cooled. The non-com at the left is watching for the enemy to appear. I love the caption, bring 'em on. All right, and one more on this page. And it says, the haze, yeah, there you go. The haze across the left center of the picture proves that the machine gun is in action. An enemy patrol has appeared on the right flank. The gun is being trained upon it. Special blank adapters were used on machine guns to ensure pressure in the barrel sufficient to operate the weapon. I can understand how they'd have to do that. Whole different set of circumstances when you're not shooting real bullets, right? And here we are on the next page, right here.
Observation planes.
Isn't that a riot?
Yeah.
2 of the observation planes taking part in the operations are seen here, based in Malone Airport, where they flew to the battlefield. Each plane equipped with radio receiving and transmitting apparatus, permitting two-way communication with ground stations at regimental or divisional headquarters. Aerial observance played an important part in the training. Now that's one thing. Then you go and look at this bottom picture and wait until you hear me read the legend for that. This blew me away. Where radio communication is impossible, planes are summoned by signals laid out on the ground by white panels. A message is tied to a rope stretched between 2 poles, and the rope is snared by the plane through use of a weighted cable. With this, the note is drawn up to the plane whose crew deliver their answer by dropping a message. The picture shows a plane picking up a communication. Isn't that truly amazing? I love it. That's a great story. Oh, here's a good shot, too. This one shows so many men. Reminiscent of Civil War scenes, the stacked rifles indicate resting troops. In this motor age, infantrymen do less marching than their grandfathers did in '61. Oh boy, not 1961 either, folks. Speed was a factor in those times, and hardened troops would make 30 or 40 miles if forced. Today, they make 200. Trucks hasten them to the battlefield. Here they're awaiting trucks to carry them back to camp after a hard day of fighting. Celerity of movement is not the only achievement. Energy is conserved. Scenes such as that depicted were frequent over the occupied areas during days and nights that the maneuvers were in progress. Back at camp, a good meal would be waiting. You can count on that. All right. You remember the first time you heard the word pup tent? You couldn't wait when we were kids. Couldn't wait to get a pup tent.
You know what's synonymous with that is shelter half.
Oh yes, a shelter half. There you go. Gosh,
one infantryman
leave it to you to come and talk about shelter halves.
One infantryman would have half of that and a stick, and the other infantryman would have the other half and the stick, and they would. Those were their shelters, and that's where they slept.
And you had a shelter half.
That's right.
I love it. Every soldier remembers his first night, it says, in a pup tent. Although resisting heavy rains, these shelters have no fronts, making it necessary to drape a slicker over the opening. Veterans often join two of them, entering from the middle. During night operations, guardsmen were so fatigued that many slept in the open.
Uh-oh.
They were so tired they couldn't even crawl into the tent.
Well.
Shelter half. Napper, that's a good one. I love it. All right, here we go. Next page. And this is a good one. Alert guardsmen captured these two soldiers of the enemy during a short battle. Being prisoners was not such a sad fate. They were allowed to return to their own outfit at the close of the day. However, they missed the experience of that day of training. Often prisoners were subjected to severe grilling by officers of the capturing force, and sometimes were passed back through the higher commands of the intelligence section and headquarters in hopes of obtaining information of importance as to the positions and strength of the enemy. No torture, though, right?
No.
Such proceedings gave experience to the officers of the G2, the intelligence service. Those are great, just the expressions on those guys' faces. I love to look at it.
We were instructed to give name, rank, and serial number only.
That's it.
If captured.
Yeah, and we have a lot of friends of ours, Bob Booth and others, who were prisoners
Captured,
of war.
yes.
Yeah. And here we go. Of course, there were casualties. Casualties were picked out for each engagement to afford training for medical detachments. Stretcher bearers scoured the front lines, administering first aid and hastening back to the first aid stations and evacuation posts from which the wounded were taken to divisional hospitals. Here is a casualty being taken from the ambulance. You can see the door on the right. This may be a case of real sickness, most commonly colds, or the results of indulging in green apples. Don't you love it? Because we had a lot of apple orchards around here then, and we
yes.
still do now, and that was a real treat for the guys to get apples. Some of them didn't know enough not to eat the green ones, though, I guess, huh? I love it.
I believe you're aware that Normandy was an apple country, very much
That's
like
right, too.
apples in our Champlain Valley.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Did you know that before you went there?
No, I learned it when we got there.
Did you have time to eat an apple?
I did, yes. I ate some apples. Of course, it was apple time, and June, July. We broke through France in July 24th, then moved on up into Belgium in the summer. So there were a lot
There's
of
some early
a
apples
lot-
going on there, sure.
But the so-called Applejack was called Calvados in
I have never heard of that.
Calvados in Normandy, and it was so powerful that the boys would use some in their cigarette lighters as fluid,
Come on.
and it worked.
Is it that?
That's a fact.
Oh, if you drink a glass of that, you didn't know what country you were in. Did I show
Oh,
you
they-
the next picture? I don't think I did yet.
If the boys got some Calvados when they would go into a farmhouse,
That's a good story.
they would mix it with juices.
You are the best. You're the best storyteller, Nabber.
Oh,
Oh, here's a tank in trouble. Motorists can appreciate the problem the tank repairman faces. The wrecking truck at the right is the heaviest in the Army, 31 tons.
Yeah,
Its
has
crane
to.
will lift a 10-ton tank.
has to.
In the picture, it's picked up one end of the tank while the men are examining the mechanism. Tanks are liable to the troubles which all motors are heir to, but tank drivers don't have to worry about punctured tires. The tank commands include complete repair equipment. The photo gives a good illustration of the Caterpillar tread of two of the machine gun positions. And two of the machine gun positions. Interesting. All right. Now this bottom picture is something that we've talked about a great deal when we started our program today of the troops marching, and what a spectacle it must have been for little kids and older teenagers to watch this. It talks about an infantry regiment in column of 4 on its way. First days of the training, bikes were taken for the, not bikes, hikes, not bikes. Hikes were taken for the purpose of hardening the guardsmen preparatory to the strenuous exertions they'd be called upon to make during combat exercises. The column here is keeping strictly within its own right-hand lane and leaving fully half the highway for other traffic. Throughout the 2 weeks of field work, moving troops constantly observed the requirements of civilian travel, which proceeded with very few interruptions caused by the soldiers. And that, to me, is amazing. With that many troops on the move, you know, regular enterprise was carried on and people moved from place to place. Here's a good one. They must have planned to take these pictures ahead of time before the maneuver so they could chronicle it in this book. Remember I told you miles of telephone wire are strung when the troops go into battle? Yep. These communication lines reach from the very front positions to headquarters, usually at the extreme rear. After the engagement, or when a general movement takes the forces away from that particular area, these lines have to be rewound.
Sure.
And 2 wires are being reeled in simultaneously. Everybody's got a job to do, right?
That's right.
All right, here's another good shot in the middle. And it says, quite different from the old scenes, is this of a battery about to return to its camp after 2 days of fighting. The caissons no longer go rolling along.
Yes.
There are no caissons. Trucks replace them, as the picture shows. The rough-riding old-time timber has vanished with motorization. Isn't that amazing?
Quite a weapon.
That
6
sure
inch
is. Look at this bottom one here.
howitzer.
Yeah. Howitzer crew cleaning and oiling the 6.1-inch weapon after a day of action. These are the big Berthas of a division, placed
150.
far back from the firing line, right?
Yes.
Hurling their shells high above their own troops.
Yeah.
The corporal beside the wheel is seeing that every attention is given to the mechanism. Imagine there's a bit of a recoil when that baby fires.
I guess so.
Huh?
Yes. Be
That-
careful.
Yeah, it might be bouncing a little bit. Oh, here's another good shot. Very interesting. You're going to think, what are palm trees doing in Plattsburgh? Well, I'll tell you that those aren't palm trees. I can tell you right now. Only an Army tent can be furled around its center pole in the fashion showed. Isn't that amazing? After an absence from camp, blankets are damp, tents are stuffy. There's nothing like a good airing and a lot of sunshine to make everything comfortable. Ropes are slipped off the pegs, and the heavy canvas can be wound around a single pole. The umbrella-like object topping the poles is the abbreviated fly, or the cap of the tent. It's ropes being used to steady the pole. Another method of ventilation is seen at the extreme right background, where the side wall has been trussed up, permitting the breeze to have full sweep through the side wall. Isn't that amazing? All right. This one just says recuperating. I imagine there was a lot of recuperating, R&R. Between battles, most of the men devoted their spare time to getting rested from the strenuous efforts of constant marching and alertness. Cot beds are supplied the Army. Did you ever sleep on a cot?
Oh, yes, yes.
I was being facetious.
We had one fellow in the unit, we called him horizontal. If he
I love
if
it.
he had time out, he was in his sack. He wouldn't get out there and exercise or play volleyball or
Like Beetle Bailey.
do anything else. It was sleep with him.
Isn't that
So we
amazing?
call him horizontal.
Horizontal, I love it. Anyway, between battles, the men devoted their spare time to getting rested from the strenuous efforts. Cot beds are supplied to the Army, which lives in comfort when in camp. That's comfort, huh? Across the front of the picture may be seen the trench dug to prevent water working in and dampening the ground. You always had to have trenches for various reasons.
You know, in that regard, when I would sleep in my pup tent with another party, I'd have to dig a little ridge in where my shoulder, my hip bone would fit in there.
Really?
So that I could sleep comfortably.
On the ground?
On the ground.
Oh,
Yeah.
my goodness. I don't think I could ever sleep comfortably on the ground.
Well, as comfortably as I could.
Now, here is an amazing contrivance. This is a stove and a half. Assuming the truism of the old adage that an army fights on its stomach, a mass sergeant and his cooks are as deserving of praise for success as are the generals.
Mess Sergeant?
What did I say, mass? No, I didn't mean a mass sergeant.
He's a mess.
It's a mess sergeant. You got that right. I'm sorry. There are many tricks to the culinary trade, as is well illustrated in the Army. During the maneuvers, the same food was supplied to all the troops each day, but hardly any two messes had identical menus. Each mess sergeant aimed at varying the meals as much as possible. Hence, there was a constant change in the use of even the same ingredients. Veterans have found that the element of food surprises helps guarantee satisfied soldiers.
Yeah.
Look at that stove. Isn't that amazing? With a big kettle in the back, and looks like he's got slippers on and his jeans.
It appears like he's firing it up, and then there's a handle and pushes it back.
I think you're right. Handle that
Over the
pushes that back
stovepipe.
in. Isn't that amazing? All right, down below.
Chow
Says-
time.
Yeah. Every
there
soldier
mess kits?
recognizes this picture. The line forms on the left. Each man ready with his cup and plate for the serving. You got it right, the mess kit. You've carried them
Oh, yes.
a few thousand
Oh,
times.
absolutely.
At right is a soldier is bearing his meal to go to a secluded spot where he'll enjoy it. Hard-working doughboys look forward to their 3 hearty meals during field work such as Plattsburgh afforded. All right, next page.
Oh,
You'll
boy.
love this one, Nap.
Yes.
By the way, we've got Nap Light with us, who was a 17-year-old senior in high school when the maneuvers took place, going to MAI. It says, after a long stretch in the field, tired, dejected troops show pep again when their band meets them as they march back to camp. At once, any slovenliness vanishes, and a smartly military column swings down the highway. That's a funny-looking highway, I'll tell you that. Whenever music is needed, the Army band is on the job. One feature of the maneuvers was the massing of many bands for a never-to-be-forgotten concert at Plattsburgh by 600 musicians. I'm sorry you missed that one.
Yes, I did. I
Can
saw
you
it.
imagine what that must have been like?
Yeah, fantastic.
Constant practice is the life of the musicians. 600! I'd love to hear a recording of that.
What a band.
All right. I love this next picture too. Tell somebody to go jump in a lake.
You like the next one?
The 44th Division has a decided advantage in terrain. Near its camp, a stream formed a natural swimming pool where the men could be found whenever opportunity offered. It was nicely screened, too, and few of the New Englanders brought their bathing suits when they left for the maneuvers. Okay, now down in the corner, there's the ubiquitous bugler.
Yeah.
Replaces the drummer of past generations who read orders in the beat and rattle of his drum. From reveille to taps, the bugle dominates the soldier's day. Did you ever have a bugler in your units?
Oh, yes.
Did you really?
Yeah, reveille and taps. Yeah, morning and night. Yeah.
And there are so many different different forms of music that the buglers played for different, down through the years. Some of the modern buglers that we've heard in our recreations of the Battle of Plattsburgh scenes playing just wonderful stuff.
Oh, yes.
I love it. And somewhere in my wife's family there was a Civil War drum. Because one of the boys was a drummer. He got very young and was a drummer. And Kay and I often wonder where that drum ended up. Oh, would I love to have it today, right? All right. Here's a word we don't like to use very often. It says retreat, but there's a reason. And we took a brief pause for the cause, and now we're back with my good friend Napoleon Knapp Light from Peru, who was a 17-year-old when these maneuvers took place in Plattsburgh, the biggest maneuvers ever in 1939. And have you still got that picture on there? It says, at 5 o'clock each afternoon, all companies answered the call to retreat, with men at present arms and officers at salute. Retreat was sounded, and Old Glory lowered from its staff. Officers and men not in formation came to attention and saluted facing the direction of the flag. A different meaning that we sometimes associate to retreat, right? Mm-hmm. Now, here's something very interesting below that. And it's called a Lister bag. Although it stands in the full rays of the sun from sunrise to sunset, the Lister bag, named from Colonel Lister, its inventor, yields fairly cool water, thanks to the law of evaporation. The container stands at the head of each company street, popular gathering place on a hot day. Imagine it would be.
Yeah. And they insisted that we fill our canteen with fresh water every day, so we would have a water supply. A canteen.
Yeah, sure.
It was attached to our belt, and it had a canvas cover on it.
And most of them were,
And
I
we
think
would
in your
fill it
day, were made of aluminum, I think.
Yes, and we would fill it from the Lister bag in the center of the company
No
street.
kidding. So that's very familiar to you.
Yes, it was.
I don't know if we want to. Do you want to show the picture?
I'll carefully. I'll take it carefully.
You will take the picture of the company shower. Everybody had to clean up a little bit, right?
I got it from the waist up.
From the waist up. Good for you. Each division, but we're looking at these guys in all their natural glory.
Mm-hmm,
Each division had its shower baths, barrels kept filled by a gasoline engine and pump, raised on a platform, a row of pipes with faucets at intervals surrounding the scaffold. The water was cold, but the bath was popular, particularly after a dusty hike. Mm-hmm. All right, let's look at this next one. And upon the Quartermaster Corps rests the duty of feeding and supplying the Army. Listen to this. It's a task without cessation. For the men eat whether fighting or resting. There's no vacation for the Quartermaster Corps. Perishable produce shipped into the area daily, consigned to various railheads, whence it was distributed direct or carried by quartermaster trucks to distributing points centrally located. From these points, the trucks of the units served drew their supply. Such a scene is shown in this picture that you're looking at. The boxes are stacked for quick handling. Very, very interesting. Another good shot down below. And this one, from this canvas tank raised upon the platform to provide gravity flow, the water wagons will get their supplies for regiments and companies. 10-gallon milk can is a popular water container in the Army. A truck stops under the hose at the left, quickly fills the cans. Tank trucks haul the water to this reservoir. All very interesting. Boy, I love this row of tanks on the next page.
We called it a large Lister bag.
A large Lister bag, I guess it was, huh? All right. The long line of tanks shows a portion of the highly mechanized forces of the First Army. The picture gives a fine view of the Caterpillar tread and the wheels on which it runs, shows the machine gun positions. Tanks took an active part in the maneuvers, being one of the reliances of the regular forces. Oh boy, here's a state-of-the-art trucks right here in the middle.
Yeah.
Look at these, huh? 1939. One of the newer type trucks carrying the searchlights, towing the generator thereof, and an anti-aircraft organization. Generators contained in the box-like trailer that's behind, you see it?
Yes.
With a powerful searchlight concealed beneath the cover of the truck. There were several anti-aircraft units on hand. Here's another one with more trucks. Bear in mind, for those young people who are watching, that this all happened 70 years ago. The 3-inch anti-aircraft gun on its trailer behind the 6-wheel truck in the foreground. Anti-aircraft weapons are very adaptable, can be assembled for action or made ready for transportation in a very few minutes. The wheels seen above the ground form part of the gun carriage. White wall tires, I love it, white wall tires. Oh boy, here's another great shot over here. Look at this one of the motorcycle and sidecar. Isn't that delightful? Motorcycles perform many duties in the Army. Motorcycle riders carry messages to points not reached by other means of communication. With sidecars, they used to transport commanders quickly from unit to unit, and in a pinch can be employed for the movement of small combat forces, very small combat forces.
Yeah, one to a cycle.
All right. Were you ever in a spot, Nap, where they had to build bridges quickly across any rivers or streams?
Yes, in the Battle of the Rhineland, of course, they had to put bridges across because the Germans had destroyed the bridges.
Yeah, they did pontoon bridges, they did
Oh,
various
sure.
kinds of, look at this one. A trestle built by the engineers. Its supports are interlaced and braced, has an appearance of stability to satisfy an elephant. One of several structures provided by the engineers for river crossing during the operations. Heavy traffic moved over. It had to be, right? If you're going to move a 10-ton tank, you better be ready. And there's the pontoon bridge on the bottom. Right? You can see how that's built, can't you? Light appearing pontoon bridge capable of carrying loaded trucks. Every year the engineers are faced with an increasing loads as trucks and tanks grow in weight. They keep up with the rolling equipment at the same time holding their bridge building material within limits suitable for quick handling. And we're getting down to the bitter end.
Yes.
Here's a good shot. It says, before going out for the last combat exercises, several regiments of National Guard troops struck camp, packed all equipment not required in the field, made ready to march directly from the battlefield to their homebound trains. As in the illustration, tents came down simultaneously at the bugle call. It was not, in this case, the last act of the maneuvers, but it was indicative of an early homegoing after 2 weeks of the most strenuous training to which National Guard troops had ever been submitted. Look at this last hurrah here. It says, no explanation is necessary for this picture. Every Army man recognizes in the circular group the tense attitudes that an age-old Army game is in progress. They look tense, but actually they're enjoying relaxation after a day of training, which at Plattsburgh gave little time for recreation. I thought when we were looking at the mess tent and that big stove, they were going to tell how much food the guys were eating, but I found in the beginning where under the title, The Battle of Plattsburgh, on the first page, one paragraph, and I want to read it to our viewers to give you an idea how big this biggest ever war games was. The feeding of this army was a task accomplished through an army depot established for the period in Plattsburgh. Standard canned foods were shipped in, but fresh foods came largely from the area. It was estimated that the hungry soldiers consumed more than 170 tons of beef, nearly 235 tons of bread, 328 tons of potatoes, 110 tons of cabbages, get this one, 113,000 dozen eggs, 110,000 pounds of potatoes, 37 tons of chicken, and boy, the cows were busy. 43,750 gallons of milk. To enumerate a part, it says, so that's part of it.
Yes.
The accuracy with which food is rationed was demonstrated by the 43rd Division, which had a surplus of only 18 lemons after providing for 7,000 meals. Isn't that a great way to
I'm
end
surprised they didn't tell how much beer was sold because across from the street where I lived in Beekman, they had a tent serving refreshments to the soldiers, and one of my friends worked there, and it was selling beer to the
No
troops.
kidding.
Yep.
So I imagine there were a few kegs and a few bottles. You think so?
I'm sure there were.
You know what? Nap Light, it's one of the great pleasures in my life to have you as a friend.
Oh, thank you.
To know how many people whose lives you touched by supplying music with your bands for, I don't know. You actually played
70
a gig.
years.
70 years.
Yes.
So you actually played a New Year's gig a few years ago, you told me.
Yes. Unfortunately, that was one of the last ones.
Oh, and the minute we walked in the door, Nap says, I miss playing. I really miss playing. Because you didn't have very many free New Year's Eves, did you?
No, very few. As a matter of fact, I used to say if a musician doesn't work on New Year's Eve, he's not much of much of a musician.
But you did it.
And it's happened to me now for about 3 years. I haven't worked, and I miss it. And it's because so many of my contemporaries have gone, unfortunately.
Well, and you're gonna, looking at you, I know you're gonna live to be 100. It's a great pleasure to have you here also.
Well, thank
to
you.
reflect on your memories of this wonderful Battle of Plattsburgh in 1939.
I was here.
We've said it before, and we'll say it again.
Shall we cover again? Yeah.
We've said it before, and we'll say it again. We have so much history right around us. I mean, the building we're sitting in now is a historic building on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base. And we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of the wonderful things that are going to come here with this Battle of Plattsburgh Association. We're approaching the year 2014, significant year in celebrating the Battle of Plattsburgh. We are now in the quadricentennial year of Samuel de Champlain's discovery and trip down through Lake Champlain. It's a great time to be alive. You've seen a lot of things in your lifetime, Nap, and yet you came up smiling. I love it. Give my best to Teresa.
Thank you.
The Yankees will have a wonderful season this year.
Well, we hope so.
She's a staunch fan. And we thank you all for watching our program. Thanks to Calvin for spotting this wonderful book called Memories of the First Maneuvers, Plattsburgh, New York, First Army Maneuvers, 1939. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for your contributions. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.